Good evening, welcome everyone.
This meeting is being recorded.
Om Parthaya Pradibodhidam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Grathidam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaidamritavarshinim Bhagavadim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ampatva Manusantadhami Bhagavad Gite Bhavadveshinim Yam Brahma Varunendra Rudramarudastunyanti Divyaistavai Vedai Sangapadakramopaniषदे Gayantiyam Samagaha Dhyanavastita Tadgatena Manasa Pashyantiyam Yogino Yasyandam Navidusura Suragana Devaya Tasmai Namaha. We are discussing the sixth verse of the ninth chapter. We already completed the fifth one. The sixth verse, the sixth sloka is Yatha akasa sthido nityam vayu sarvatra gomahan tatha sarvani bhudani matsthani iti upadharaya. The simple meaning is, just as the strong Mahan Vayu, mighty strong wind, Nityam Sarvatra means that always moving everywhere. The wind is moving everywhere. The strong wind is moving everywhere, including the akasa, the sky. Though it rests in the sky, still it doesn't have the ability to bring about any modification on the sky. I mean, it is all pervaded everywhere, but it doesn't have the ability to affect the sky. Similarly, all living beings rest in me. This is the simple literal translation. Now, if you read the Upanishadic concept of evolution, there is a well-known verse in the Taittiriya Upanishad, that is in the Krishna Yajurveda. Atmana akashaha akashad vayo vayo rakni akne apaha abhya pridhivi pridhivyam oshadibhya annam. This is a very well-known verse. What it means is, from Atman, from the highest transcendental reality, akasha, space evolves, space comes into existence. The space emerges from Atman, and from space or akasha, air, from air, the fire principle, and the fire principle, the water principle, and from there this earth, and from the earth all the plants, and because of all these plants and other appropriate suitable living conditions, different living beings also emerge. It's a very interesting, of course, we don't have right now the time to expound this. So what it essentially means is, the divine reality is present everywhere. Just as clay is present in all the different clay pots or different utensils, vessels made of clay, all pervaded by clay, all the different ornaments made of gold are pervaded by gold. Gold is like akasha, like the space, which is all pervading. Now, all the pots and pans made of clay really exist in clay. All the various golden ornaments exist in gold. All the various living beings actually exist in God. So this idea behind. In the Advaitic tradition, it is more logical. It says everything is pervaded by the divine reality. So if we ourselves make a self-analysis, my ability to work with my senses, mind, intellect, the entire body complex, all these exist and they are supported by one reality, Atman. If the Atman withdraws from this body-mind complex, it is no more a functional entity. In some of the Upanishads, like Chandogya Upanishad, an analogy is given. A tree is pervaded by its living liquids. When it completely gets dried up, the tree dies. So if you cut a big branch of a tree, the big branch can exist for some time till the living, till what sustains it gets dried out. Then nothing can grow from it. Similarly, in all of us, in all living beings, that divine reality is present. Now we should always remember, this is a difficult thing to understand, especially in some of the religious traditions. People sometimes, I have heard many criticisms in many books written, of course, within the last 300, 400 years you find. Vedanta or Hinduism believes that man is God. A living man is God. And so you're worshipping a human being who may go to Kaiser tomorrow for a surgery, who may undergo a heart surgery, and you are considering him as God. And he is just a bundle of all the terrible things within, and just a sky bag, and you consider him God. So it is a kind of, considering ordinary human beings as divine, as God. It is not at all. This is a very central principle that should be understood also in the context of image worship in temples. No one worships a stone, a piece of stone, or a painting, or anything. Even the elaborate rituals in puja. A spiritual seeker who has practiced austerity and meditation for decades, he has developed the power to concentrate, to meditate upon, within his heart, and focusing on the divine presence within him. And he realizes that divine presence within him by meditation, prayer, uttering mantras and so on. And then what he does, he's actually invoking that all-pervading divine reality to be present in him. And that is true. If you pray and meditate and read holy books, recite holy names, practice compassion, humanism, broad-mindedness, love, everything, then naturally you acquire some qualities which you may call divine qualities or spiritual qualities, godly virtues, so to speak. That's how we really connect with our own divine nature. And then the worshipper actually projects through his meditation that divine reality on an image. And some of the mantras uttered, like avahana mantras, they invite, they politely request the all-pervading divine reality and divine energy to be present on the image. Similarly, when you respect a mystic, I'm just talking about, let's say in the context of Christian mysticism, so many great men and women, why do people respect them? Because they developed some of the qualities which we may associate with Jesus or divine mystics, divine saints and sages. I'm just talking in the context of Christian mysticism. That is true in Hinduism and Buddhism and so on. So the point is, the pot contains the clay. You identify the clay from which the pot is made. You identify the gold from which the golden ornament is made. Similarly, we should try to identify the divine reality present in all of us within this body-mind complex. And when we practice spiritual qualities, we unfold, we manifest, we actualize those divine qualities, because those divine qualities are present everywhere. So that's a very, very important verse to remember. That is, Yata akasa nityam vayu sarvatra gomahan tata sarvani bhudani masthani upataharaya. Mean all living beings rest in me. I support them, I sustain them. I am the divine reality present in all of them. That's why they are able to go to the Mars, go to the moon, make a great discovery, write a great classical work, do a great painting. All these are different manifestations of different expressions of this divine principle present in all of us. In fact, this idea will be further elaborated in the coming verses. Now, in this context, there is a well-known verse in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, and this also comes in the third chapter, which is a very famous chapter. It contains Antaryami Brahmana, it contains this Aksharavidya Brahmana, all the discussions you find. Very famous verse, the sheer poetry and the philosophical grandeur made these verses very, very celebrated. Even if you read the translations of these mantras by a man like Paul Deussen, who translated many of these verses into German in 19th century, and of course innumerable translations, and we should remember, no translation can really do justice to a great poetry, leave alone a great philosophical, mystical poetry. So the verse is this, and here is a discussion, a dialogue between Yajnavalkya and Gargi was a great woman saint of ancient Vedic times. So Gargi puts two questions to Yajnavalkya, and then Yajnavalkya says, if you use your simple power of inference, or Anumana Pramanam, Anumanam is inference, then you can understand that there is a divine principle. Because of that divine principle, everything exists, everything gets its sustenance, support from the divine principle. Edasya akshirasya prashasane gargi surya chandramaso vidudo tishtadaka. Edasya akshirasya prashasane gargi dyava prithivyo vidude tishtadaka. Edasya akshirasya prashasane gargi nimesha muhurta ahoratrani ardhamasa masa rutavasam vatsara iti viduda tishthanti. Edasya akshirasya prashasane gargi prachyo anya nadyasyandanti swedebhya pervadebhya pradityo anyaha yam cha disham anu edasya akshirasya prashasane gargi dadato manushyaha prashamsanti yajamanam deva durvim pidaro anvayataha, etc. Now, I am not going to read the whole thing, but I shall try to explain this. Now what it means is, Yajnavalkya tells this great lady philosopher, who puts some very important question to him. How do we understand that behind this insignificant straw, or behind Mount Everest, or Pacific Ocean, or behind a tiny bit of this book that I have in front of me, there is one divine reality whom we don't see. Yajnavalkya says, if you have got a right mind, you can use your power of inference, that is Anumana Pramana. And he says, at the command of the imperishable, the sun and the moon stand in their respective positions. At the command of that imperishable reality, heaven and earth, the sky, all stand in their respective positions. And because of that imperishable reality, what we call times, hours, days, months, years, calculations of time, dividing of days into days and nights, half months, seasons, years. At the command of that imperishable reality, some rivers flow to the east. So you find in the text, some rivers, in this Indian context, some rivers like Ganga flow to the east and fall in Bay of Bengal. Some rivers like Indus, they fall to the west and they join the Arabian Ocean. So, Prachya, Praditya means some rivers flow to the east, some rivers flow to the west. You may ask this question. One may explain why a stone, when you throw to the sky, it falls to the ground. You may say gravitation. Suppose you ask the question, why should there be gravitation? Well, there is no real answer. Why should this earth go around the sun? And you may have some explanations, descriptions, answers in physics. But if you push the question further, why at all? Why it should be so? In fact, for that why, there is no answer in any branch of empirical sciences. So Yajnavalkya says, you can find an answer if you push farther enough. In the world of nature, if you push your inquiry farther enough, you may have many Einsteins and Newtons emerging in every age, every era. But the fundamental question, why at all it should be like that, there is no real answer. Why should there be an invisible, intangible, interrelatedness, an invisible harmony, an interdependence in the whole creation? Sri Ramakrishna, in his much more simple language, much more simple than Upanishad says, why should God puts affection in the heart of a mother as soon as the child is born? It is that affection that sustains the child when the child can't eat his own food or anything. So you find this interrelatedness. A question like this as to why, for which there is no real answer. So Yajnavalkya says, if you inquire and look for a proof through inference, all that you can say, there is some higher intelligence. The problem arises, a man like Richard Dawkins can get angry only if you tell him that God created all these 6,000 years back. If you don't say that, I don't think the most cutthroat agnostics or atheists will dare to challenge this higher philosophy. Because inference is an important tool of inquiry in modern science, in physics, and also in higher Vedantic philosophy. But if you say one day God came and he decided let there be, and then he made hell and the heaven, as in Peter to stand doorsteps with a long list of do's and don'ts and make sure that the unworthy won't enter the gates of heaven. If you say that, then they will say, oh, this is an idea that we can't agree with. But the Upanishad is telling, you use your inference. That's why Yajnavalkya is using the supreme tool of inference, Anumana. That is Anumana Pramanabhyam. That's Shankaracharya in his very wonderful statement. He says, if you use the word Anumana, then you can understand the truth. In fact, Shankaracharya has got something very funny to say. Anumanam pramanam uvanyasyati. That says, Chedanavantam prashasitaram asamsarinam antarena naida yuktam. So, he says the maintenance of all these respective positions and the existence and maintenance of all the different entities which are interrelated, the slightest deviation can cause total disaster to living beings living this planet. If the earth moves a little closer to the sun or moves farther away from the sun, either it may burn into gas form or it can be the beginning of ice age if it moves away from the sun. So Shankaracharya says, Chedanavandam prasasidaram asamsarinam andarena naidad yuktam. Edat na yuktam. This cannot be logically understood or explained. Chedanavandam prasasidaram asamsarinam andarena. Without conceiving of some higher effulgent intelligence, which is non-empirical, which is transcendental, which is beyond the empirical world. Without conceiving of such a supreme intelligence, which is the essence of consciousness or effulgence itself, we cannot logically explain, neither yuktam, it is not logically conceivable, this interrelatedness. That's why Edasya Vakshasya Prasasane Gagi Surya Chandramasu Vidudo Dishtadahimina, that's how it begins. Without that Akshara, without that supreme imperishable divine reality, somewhere you cannot really explain this interrelatedness, this invisible harmony behind the apparent chaos. That's the idea behind. So, this is a very, very famous verse which is quoted by, sometimes, in their bhashyas, great commentators like Shankaracharya, Ramanuja and others, they quote these mantras from Yajurveda, this is Brihadaranyaka, Vajrayana Samhita, and they try to establish the logic of these verses. So that is one important thing. Next one is also equally important. Sarva bhudani kaundeya pragadim yanti mamikam kalpakshaye punasthani kalpado visrjami aham. So this is another important verse. At the end of kalpa, so kalpa is a word used. It has got more than one interpretation, but the most popular interpretation is kalpa is a combination of daytime and nighttime, just one day, 24 hours in the life of Brahma. Now, how to explain this concept of Brahma? Not Brahman, please. Not Brahman, but Brahma. It means Brahma, no Brahmanam, Brahma. So it is Brahma. It is. Brahman means this Akshara, the attributeless, impersonal, transcendental, divine principle. Brahman. Brahma is more or less one of the trinities of Hindu pantheon. is supposed to be, in other words, conceived to be the creative dimension of the Supreme Reality. So you may call it created God, for want of a better expression. Now, it is said that Brahma's one day corresponds to manifestation, evolution, beginning of creation. Creation, of course, it should be understood. The word creation is used frequently to translate the word Srishti, which is a Sanskrit word. Srishti actually is not creation. Srishti actually is word projection, sarga. Projection is something like, let's say, the water projects as a big, huge iceberg. And then maybe if there is global warming, the huge iceberg can go back to its original form, water. So you cannot say that ice was created. When water itself projects in extreme low temperature, it becomes iceberg. So projection is the right word in the Vedantic language for what we normally try to call using the word creation. So technically what it means is, so Brahma is the cosmic intelligence. Its day corresponds to the beginning, the unfolding, the manifestation, the evolution. I mean projection, existence coming into being, assuming names and forms. And its night, Brahma's night, corresponds to dissolution. Sometimes the word pralaya is used. Pralaya means prakashena layaha. That means something that goes back to its causal form. Like the iceberg going back to its causal form, which is water. In other words, there is no real creation or real dissolution. There is only projection. So that is an important point to be remembered whenever we discuss Advaita Vedanta. Remember, my interpretation, the basis of my interpretation is Shankaracharya's Advaita philosophy. Though I quote from Ramanuja, in fact, this Edasya Aksharasya Prasasane Gargi, that Veda mantra from Bhagavad Upanishad, it is quoted by not Shankaracharya but by Ramanuja. So sometimes we quote Ramanuja also, because Ramanuja frequently quotes from other Veda mantras. Of course, in order to establish his philosophy, but those are very relevant mantras. So one important point is, this particular 7th verse tells us that at the end of Kalpa, at the end of, in other time, when it at the time of night of Brahma, all things go back to my Prakriti. Prakriti means the Prakriti which is with, let us say, you may roughly call it, if you call it pre-Big Bang, let's say pre-Big Bang state of existence. That may be the best way to explain this. And then projection is that post-Big Bang state. That may be the best way to put it. So, what it means is, there is no real creation, there is only projection. So even when it is projected, even when we see the world in front of us, that world really is not separate from its real causal form. Just like iceberg is not separate from water, a golden ornament is not separate from gold. And in order to drive home this idea, there is a well-known verse in the Mundaka Upanishad. The famous verse is, Yathornana abhisridite grannhadecha yatha prithivya oshadaya sambhavandi yatha satapurushat keshalovamani tatha aksharat sambhavandiha vishwam. It is a very, very famous verse. The idea is there is an illustration taken from a spider. Now a spider, its web is web. It emits some kind of a liquid or whatever it is out of its body, and then it forms a spider's web. Then it leaves that. And then finally it withdraws that very thing back to itself. So what does it mean? I mean, the material out of which the spider weaves its web comes out of its body, and then it withdraws the same thing into itself. In other words, it sends forth and draws its thread and ebbs like that. And then what happens? It itself withdraws itself. Now, this is explained with the help of course, in Shankaracharya's commentary, which I am not going to quote. There are three important illustrations given here. One is the spider sends forth its liquid, whatever it is, out of its body, and then it creates a web. This is the first illustration for creation. It's one of the analogies for explaining creation theory in Vedanta. Now one may ask this question: the spider has a purpose because it wants to live in that web. For that, it creates this material, and out of which it makes a web. Like that, Brahman, from which this creation emerges, has a purpose, like the spider, which has a plan in mind, that is, he has to live there. There is a purpose. So in order to remove that misinterpretation, the Brahman has got a purpose for creation. In order to refute that such a possible misinterpretation, the Upanishad gives another analogy. What it says, yatha prithivya oshadaya sambhavanti. Oshadaya means plants, trees, and so on. The different plants and trees emerge from earth. Earth doesn't have a purpose. Spontaneously, naturally, these plants, trees all emerge from the earth. So, through the second illustration, the possibility of wrong interpretation is removed. Now still you may have a doubt. Earth is inert. Plants and trees emerge. Like that, Brahman is inert. So in order to refute or avoid such a wrong or misinterpretation from emerging, the Upanishad mantra gives a third analogy. What is the third analogy? Yada sadapra purushat keshalovmani. You see, from a person who is alive, who is conscious, who is not inert but conscious, from a living human being, his hair, mustache grow, and also his the nails also grow. So this is the magic of one analogy running after another analogy. It's a very, very wonderful. Of course, it is a good idea for us to interpret. Those of you who want to ask questions, most welcome. I shall explain further. But still, it's better to have a look at these magnificent, celebrated verses from the ancient Vedas. See, in a single verse, 3 illustrations. Now remember, the Upanishadic sages, they don't say, if you want to give another analogy, another illustration, in order to avoid a possible misinterpretation, the Upanishadic sages don't say. It is Shankaracharya who actually gives a logical analysis of why a single verse contains 3 illustrations to explain the mystery of creation. So the first one is like a spider weaving its web. You may ask the question, spider has a purpose. He wants to live there. So to avoid that wrong interpretation, next illustration. Yatha prithivyaha oshadaya sambhavanti. Yadhornanabi sridhe grinadeja, first one, then yatha prithivyaha oshadaya sambhavanti. Just like trees and plants emerge from earth. So it is spontaneous. Earth doesn't have a purpose to create a tree or a plant. It's spontaneous, it's natural, effortless. Then you may say, oh, in that case, Brahman is inert like earth. So in order to avoid that misinterpretation, Satapragashat, Satapurushat Keshalomani, Satah Purushat. I mean, from a living human being, Satapurushat Keshalomani, all his nails, all his grow. Like that, Tadha Akshara Sambhavadiha Vishwam. From that Akshara, imperishable reality, this earth, this universe, this creation emerges. So the first illustration says, Brahman is the ground of origin and also dissolution of creation. The second illustration says, even after having created, Brahman is the ground, adhara, the essence of creation, just like clay is the essence of a clay pot. The third one is, Brahman is the essence of consciousness. Sadapurushat Keshalomani, etc. So this is the magic of this wonderful verse from the Mundaka Upanishad. Now, of course, after this, we will go to the next important verse. That is 8th verse. Pragadim swam avashtabhya visrujami punapunaha. So the mystery of creation and dissolution. So one point to remember is, in Vedanta, creation is not real. Projection is the real meaning of the Sanskrit word Sarga or Srishti. Two words are commonly used. Sarga in the Bhagavad Purana and Purani literature, Srishti in the Upanishads are used. Of course, they are used in everywhere, Srishti and Sarga. The meaning of the word creation in Vedanta means projection. Because if you say, let's say a jewelry, a goldsmith made ornaments. A goldsmith may have made ornaments from gold. And that gold must have come from earth. And it must have taken several thousands of years for that gold ore to be formed like that. So if you trace its origin, actually it is like tracing the origin of seed and tree. When did the seed emerge? From a tree. And how did the tree emerge? From the seed. In other words, Vedanta says creation is like a cycle. So maybe there must have been several universes before us, and even if for some unfortunate reason entire humanity or creation gets wiped out in some kind of unpleasant, unfortunate, tragic event, global war maybe after several centuries, still creation will emerge. We cannot say that. And if you think of creation, if you extend our concept of creation of humanity beyond this tiny, little, insignificant bit of earth, if you can imagine living beings existing, and the possibility cannot be hypothetically ruled out in other planets, other levels of existence. When did all this begin? And when will all this end? The question is really a question without a real answer at the empirical level. But at the Vedantic level, Vedanta tells you, it's like the question it goes on continuing. So that's the idea behind. The discussion continues. Pragradim swam avashtabhya visrjami punapunaha bhudagramam imam krishnam avasyam pragradehi vashat. This mantra tells you, animating my own prakriti, my own this unmanifest dimension, I project again and again this whole multitude of different beings. Bhutagrama means conglomerations, different types of living beings. And then they exist. All living beings exist. They are not free. So long as we interpret ourselves as body-mind complexes, then we have to remember we are really not free. Real quest for freedom emerges when a man like Buddha really confronted this problem. He saw a sick man, a dead person, and an old age, death and sickness. So he understood. And this happens to all living beings. And goes on. One man dies, another person is born. It continues. So there is actually a kind of total helplessness. Out of this, and this helplessness is from the absence of freedom, because we are slaves in the hands of our own samskaras, our own impressions, our own habits, our own desires, our own mind traps. And when we realize this, that's why in a Bhudagramam Krishnam Avasyam. Avasyam means no freedom, like dolls in the hands of nature. We have no freedom as to where we want to be born, or when we are going to die, how we want to live. Really, there is no freedom, actually speaking. Not only that, suppose when you are a young man or you are growing as a boy, if you come to know that this is going to be your life, you won't be able to live. It's a fact. Suppose if you are growing up as a boy or a girl, whoever may be, and if you get a clear picture of all the difficulties you have to face in future, you won't be able to face those difficulties. The fact that we are not able to understand what is yet to come in future, that ignorance is what enables us to face the problem. And again, if a person comes to know that he is going to be a very rich man, then he won't do any work actually. He won't try to become rich, and he will never become rich. So, there is a kind of, what Sanskrit called avashyata. Krishnam avasyam prakriti. So long as we are attached to prakriti, sattva guna, rajo guna, tamo guna, different characteristics that constitute our human mental constitution, character constitution, we are slaves, we have no freedom. Out of an awareness of this total absence of freedom, we begin this quest for higher freedom. And that freedom is spiritual freedom. This is an important point, remember. Every person who looks for spiritual freedom begins that journey, that quest for spiritual freedom, when he realizes that he is a total slave of circumstances, samskaras, conditions, over which he has no control. That Buddha did. Buddha knew sickness, we have no control. Old age, no remedy, no freedom from old age. Death, no freedom from old age, from death. Then I should find an answer for this. So out of an awareness of one's own helplessness or awareness of total absence of freedom, this higher quest for spiritual freedom begins. Now we will have a question and answer. Perhaps you can ask questions, and most welcome.
Namaskar, Maharaj.
Yeah, namaskar.
I've seen the word avasham also translated as helpless. The irony is that the Gita is instructing us apparently that the recognition of our helplessness in that sense liberates us.
Yeah, really. Yeah, when we realize that there is no real freedom at the empirical, worldly level, then only we actually start looking for a different kind of freedom. There is a higher freedom that is very much nearest us. It is within ourselves. And that's, again, I cannot explain this better than by giving this example of Buddha. Because the three visions of Buddha, death, old age and sickness, actually convinced him of this avashada, this helplessness. See, actually, when we use the word avasha, it is not within your vasha, it is not within your control. So avashada means helplessness because of absence of freedom. So that's why prakrite vashat, she means because all of us, unless we realize our spiritual identity, we are all under the sway, under the control. Prakrite vasha means we are within the control, we are within the power of Prakriti. And what is Prakriti? Prakriti consists of Sattva Guna, Rajo Guna and Tamo Guna. Three characteristics of the human mind, human character. So accordingly we act. So we can just think of our absence of freedom. See, do we have freedom where, as to what thought is going to emerge in our mind next moment, we have no freedom. What word we are going to speak, exactly what word we are going to speak, unless we write down, of course. That is we are using a mechanical device, and there is also kind of slavery. So left to ourselves, at the empirical level, there is no real freedom. That's why, according to Vedanta, we are only trying to postpone our problems. Every effort to find an answer for a problem at the empirical worldly level is only an attempt to postpone for some time, to suspend for some time the problem. So the real answer comes only when we realize our own spiritual freedom. And then the other slavery is not taken seriously, because we realize that there is no real freedom at the empirical level. So we won't complain if there is no freedom. That's an important point. See, we feel avasha, we feel helpless only when we expect freedom at the empirical world, at the empirical level. When we realize the real freedom is not there at the empirical level, the real freedom is elsewhere, then the absence of freedom at the empirical level will not bother us. So actually we are lifting our own consciousness to a higher level. We are elevating ourselves to a higher level of wisdom and awareness. And then the so-called helplessness, absence of freedom at the empirical level, worldly level, is not something that we bother about. From when we know it is not available there, it is not to be expected there, then we won't complain when it is not available there. Yeah. We go to a post office, post office doesn't sell vegetables. You won't complain, I didn't get vegetables from the post office. Post office functions for a different purpose. You complain only when you go to a place which is expected to sell vegetables and you don't get vegetables, you feel disappointed. So if there are expectation from something, that really leads to helplessness. So that's an important point. I don't know, Bobby, am I clear?
Very clear, very clear.
Thank you.
Absolutely crystal clear.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Pranam Swamiji.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about this idea of worshiping a man as God. Or I think last week you talked about saying, I am God. You know, a person, a human being saying, I'm God.
Yeah.
You know, when I read this stanza by Sri Shankaracharya, it's called Nirvana Shankam.
Yeah. Oh yes, yeah.
He says, I am not this, I am not that, I am consciousness and bliss. Chitananda Rupa Shivoham Shivoham.
Yeah.
Isn't he saying in that? I am God.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That should be understood view. Now, actually, Aham Brahmasmi is the highest statement in Vedanta. It is called Anubhuti Vakya. It is the Upanishadic Mahavakya that states one's own inner real experience. Aham Brahmasmi. Now, when you reach that stage of spiritual evolution, as Shankaracharya did, then when you use the word I, Aham, I, it doesn't mean this body-mind complex. He's referring to the presence of the divine within him. He's always in a state of awareness of his spiritual transcendental identity. In that sense, he says, Aham Brahmasmi, Aham Nirvikalpa. Otherwise, Shankaracharya must have, at the most, he may have 6 feet or something like that, and he was just a 32-year-old man when he passed away. So he must have composed this song when he was much younger. Do you think he would say, I am God and go walking about? No. He was talking about the supreme awareness of experience that a mystic, that a realized person feels in that state of awareness. So Nirvana Shatakam belong to that category. So 4 Mahavakyas are there. Beginning with Tattvamasi, you are that Atman, you are that Brahman. That is instruction, Upadesha Vakya. And the experience is Aham Brahmasmi. Between these 2 stages, there are 2 Mahavakyas. Prajnanam Brahma, Ayam Atma Brahma. Lakshana Vakya and Siddhanta Vakya. You are actually trying to understand the implication of the instruction you receive. You are the Atman. Now, that's why in this Chandogya Upanishad, Uddalaka repeats this Tattvamasi Mahavakya 8 times. So total 9 statements are there. First 1 instruction, then 8 repetitions with 8 wonderful illustrations, very long illustrations. So now, when first Uddalaka told his own disciple and his own son who wanted to learn the supreme truth, Uddalaka instructed. Then Swetaketu said, oh, I don't understand. You're talking about the body, I am Brahman, this is what I am. Then Uddalaka went on explaining one after another. And at each stage the boy must have practiced a lot of meditation for several years. When he repeated for the 8th time, total 9 statements, then Swetaketu realized what is meant by that. So that is a state where you transcend the statement and you identify yourself with the experience of the statement. That's why Shankaracharya's commentary, Brahma Sutra Bhashya, Chadusutri elsewhere says, Aham Brahmasmi, I am the Brahman. That statement is totally different from the experience that statement indicates. So, when Shankaracharya wrote this Nirvana Shatakam, he was singing this from the higher transcendental standpoint. That's the idea behind. Yeah. Otherwise, you can imagine Jesus cried, I, my Father, and one. How can he say? He was not, when he said Father, he was not talking about Joseph. He was talking about Heavenly Father. Otherwise, Joseph, we don't know whether Joseph, he was a simple man, a carpenter, simple person. He didn't have many divine attributes. When Jesus said, I and my Father are one, people would have laughed at him, really. But he understood. So he understood. So the Father, by the word Father, he didn't mean his biological father. And his father would have scolded him if you have overheard saying. The son say, both of are one, totally different. So it is a mystical meaning, a spiritual meaning, a transcendental meaning. So that's what you find in Shankaracharya's Nirvana Shatka. Aham Nirvikalpo, etc. He would. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. So thank you for those very wonderful questions, and we'll continue the session next class. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.